Well, Donald Trump becomes the first U.S. president in history to face criminal charges. It comes after an indictment from a New York grand jury investigating a hush money payment, allegedly, to an adult film star in 2016. Here to discuss what may be in the cards for the former president and the potential implications to the U.S. economy, we have Kristol, the Bulwark editor-at-large, along with Greg Valliere, AGF Investments Chief U.S. Policy Strategist. A big thank you to you both there. So, Bill, I first want to start with you. I mean, we knew this was coming at some point. Markets don't seem to be that bothered by this at the moment. What are your big takeaways here as we're looking at this and the potential impacts for markets and the economy?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the markets have discounted one or multiple, I would say, likely indictments of the current, more or less, frontrunner for the Republican nomination. But I do think it is unprecedented. And I do think it's potentially destabilizing one way or the other. I mean, you might end up, from the market's point of view, with a better nominee and with the rule of law reasserted. You might end up with Trump strengthened and rioting in the streets. I hate to even say this, but it's, of course, quite possible. There will be several indictments. I think the one thing we know is there will be several indictments. The second thing we know is we don't know what's exactly going to be in them, what new evidence there'll be, what the reactions will be, what the reactions to the reactions will be. And so I think we're at a time of pretty real uncertainty going forward.
And Greg, what would the markets make of any of the other Republican representatives or party members kind of making their own position outright around what's taking place with former President Trump, as that could signal where the inclination for the broader party might move in the future and the economic implications there?
Well, I think an awful lot of the other Republican candidates were like Pavlovian dogs last night. They just immediately reacted by embracing Trump and criticizing harshly the New York DA. So I think that this helps Trump win the nomination. It does not help him at all in terms of winning the general election. But I think he's probably unified the party, ironically, through these. And Bill's right. There are going to be many more indictments to come.
And Greg, to follow up on that, I mean, we saw how difficult it was for Speaker McCarthy to get his position, the concessions that he had to make. What does this mean then for the debt ceiling then? Do you think we'll perhaps get even more pushback, or could we get some more moderate in the GOP, perhaps trying to find a compromise so that we don't end up at that X date and end up in a situation that we've not been in before?
I mean, if you want me to take, yeah, that's a good question. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So, Greg,
I would just say the problem. The problem is not getting a deal. You can probably get a deal. The problem is there are many House Republicans, radicals, who don't want any deal. They wouldn't vote for anything. So it's still, in my opinion, is a real threat to the markets.
Yeah, I mean, the way I'd put it is there are two possible reactions to this, basically, in the Republican Party. One is, oh, my God, we cannot continue going down this path, and a little bit of a strengthening of those forces that still exist in the Republican Party, which are not as strong as they should be, for responsibility and for not, blowing up the system one way or the other, either politically or economically. The other reaction can be just a continued radicalization of the party. You would have made money the last 6 years betting on the radicalization scenario. I thought after January 6th, and even I thought, I guess I could say, after January 6th, that maybe the party would come back to its senses. It hasn't, to be, from my point of view. But we don't know what the effect of these indictments will be. But I do think that there's more chance. The two tails are stronger than they used to be. It could either be radicalization or maybe a reaction against the radicalization.
And Greg, I mean, when we think about the other cases here, those are even more potentially explosive. You think about the Georgia case and looking to overturn election results there, the classified documents in Mar-a-Lago, and then you could even look to the incitement or the alleged incitement of the January 6th riot here. I mean, even if this case does not hold up as strongly as prosecutors are looking for, what do you anticipate of the others set to come?
Well, I think if we do get these other three cases leading to indictments, which I think is quite likely, we could by late summer, early fall be talking about Trump fatigue in the Republican Party. You have to ask the question, how much more could they possibly endure? I think I'd be interested in Bill's comments because he's so well plugged in. If Trump starts to fade, if DeSantis doesn't really catch on, there has to be another lane or two lanes for another nominee or two. Could it be Youngkin? Could it be someone a little more liberal? I mean, I've got to think there's still an opening for one or two additional candidates.
And Bill, I want to have you weigh in there.
I've thought that for a while. I think that lane, exists. I think it's a 10% chance of probability of being successful or even really truly competitive compared to Trump's, 50%, DeSantis' 40% chance of being the nominee. But you've got to think at some point it could be that a plurality, if not a majority of Republican primary voters say enough with all this craziness with Trump, enough with even the culture war stuff. Can we have a more normal Republican governor? Can we have Brian Kemp of Georgia? Can we have Glenn Youngkin of Virginia? They both seem to be pretty competent governors who got elected in swing states. In Kemp's case, reelected easily in a state Biden carried, after all. But I got to say, as I said earlier, if you betting on that scenario of people coming to their senses has not been a good bet for the last few years.
To what extent would any candidate then have to answer for any of the prior Republican president, which was President Trump, those policies, either in the retracement or the retraction of Dodd-Frank that's led to, or at least perceived to have been blamed for, some of the banking crisis that we're navigating through right now, or even in some of the broader economic impacts that have taken place because of some Trump policies?
I mean, I would say that you could argue this is an opportunity, right? You get to embrace some of the good parts of deregulation, say that maybe they went a little too far. If you're a fresh face like Youngkin, business experience, you could make a case that you end up in a sweet spot. You could also make a case that 10, 20, 30% of the party who are true Trump loyalists are furious. They refuse to vote for Youngkin. They vote Trump third party. I mean, this is where it's not so easy to just stitch this coalition and hold this coalition together, even though in theory one could sort of write that scenario.
And Bill, just to follow up, so we're looking at DeSantis here saying obviously that he's not going to participate in any sort of extradition. Talk about his positioning there, especially how the business community might be viewing this, given the strong stance that he's taken against Disney, and if he does become the potential front runner.
I mean, for me, that extradition comment is really a blatant just promise. I mean, it's not serious, because Trump's going to give himself in, presumably. But if one were to take him seriously, and he is the governor of one of our largest states, and he'd said this in his own name, so maybe we should take it seriously for a second. It's a promise to violate the law, to violate the Constitution. And do we want to set the precedent? Incidentally, if you're a business corporation operating in 50 states, the judgments in one state could just be ignored in others. The criminal, do we want to set the precedent that if you commit a crime in one state and you go to another state and the governor happens to have a different view of what that crime is, he just says, I'm not extraditing that person? That really is chaos. And so I think the recklessness of the kind of statement that DeSantis made should really give people pause.
Bill, Kristol.
And I would just add, if there's been a surprise in the last few months, it's not we all knew these indictments were coming. The surprise has been that DeSantis is not quite as formidable as most people felt. And I think his comments on Ukraine, even though he walked them back, could haunt him for quite some time.
Interesting. Bill, Kristol, who is the Bulwark editor at large, along with Greg Valliere, who is the AGF Investments Chief U.S. Policy Strategist. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on The Day. We appreciate it.